The original machine, the operators would work from this operator's desk. Next to it was a paper tape reader for reading in programs, a teleprinter for printing out the results. These screens,
those are the only way to interact with this early computer.
In this film, we have learned how a cathode ray tube produces a spot of light upon the screen.
And there were 6 of them, 6 of these screens on that early computer, to
let you see what's going on inside the machine.
And for this specific computer, they are showing us what's happening inside of a absolutely massive, by today's standard, mercury-filled computer that is programmed using rolls of paper tape like this. But despite its limitations, this is the computer used to program one of the first video games ever. Electronic Delay Storage Automatic Calculator, EDSAC, or the EDSAC computer. But this one, that one, is actually a fake. Well, kind of fake.
I thought it'd be interesting to actually build one and see how it worked.
But they did rebuild it. Dr. Andrew Herbert, as project manager, and the team reconstructed this one just a few years ago. It was sponsored by the National Museum of Computing in the United Kingdom and was built largely by volunteers. So where is the original one?
The film that I'm going to show you was made exactly 25 years ago.
Led by Maurice Wilkes. Starting a design in 1947, they did it.
The EDSAC had begun to work in May 1949, and we had developed a system of programming based on the use of a library of subroutines.
And you can see that big boy here. The 1-ton mainframe, a mechanical beast, originally covering about the size of a small studio apartment, or 400 to 500 square feet. I think it was actually 20 by 20 feet, roughly. And it is hard to imagine a computer that big. While this was meant for the math department at Cambridge, running calculations about 1,500 times faster compared to running them by hand. Something kind of out of the ordinary happened with it because of a guy named Alexander Shafto Sandy Douglas, who was a 31-year-old PhD student at Cambridge in 1950, a few years after they had started design on the EDSAC. He was working in the mathematics lab, but also interested in human-computer interaction. And he succeeded at that.
So EDSAC or user first? Well, we'll say user first, so I dial 1. Now let's see what happens. Oh, look at that.
That is OXO, also known as tic-tac-toe, or noughts and crosses if you're across the pond. And this is Sandy's program, which originally ran on the EDSAC. This is special because of the type of computer that the EDSAC was. Not a one-off machine built like the Nimrod in 1951 or Bertie the Brain. EDSAC could run any program that you write for it. It was general purpose, which we are used to today. But this was one of the first stored program computers. Probably the second truly practical one ever made, and arguably the one that wasn't really difficult to work with. Though instead of writing code on a computer, the programmers of the early 1950s would design their programs by hand and then encode it onto these strips of paper. 5-hole punched paper.
Next to it was a paper tape reader for reading in programs.
And puts it in the photoelectric tape reader,
which stores the program on the machine, not too dissimilar from loading a program onto a machine from, say, a CD or a floppy disk or a flash drive. And once you've got that program loaded, the operator runs it, and then they can print the results. Programmers like Sandy come along to gather up these printed results. It was slow to wait, but the EDSAC would run these calculations 1,500 times faster than manual calculation. So it was just so much faster in the actual time spent. even considering that there was just one of these things for the entire university to share. But the downside is there was just one of these things for the entire university. You would queue up your programs, the operators would run them one at a time throughout days or weeks, depending on how many other people are in line. But Sandy at this point had a different idea than just running calculations for the math department. While he did work with the math department, he was also studying how people interact with computers, machines like this. There's not many records of Sandy's work, though there are examples of early computer people like Mr. Turing or Grace Hopper who were thinking about how people would interact with these machines. Originally, they called it man-machine interaction. Now we call it human-computer interaction, or HCI. In the 1940s and most of the 50s, remember that computers like the EDSAC were mostly just number crunchers. Mathematicians and students were the only users.
He is joined by the mathematician, and apparently all is well.
So having this like back and forth with a computer to do something interactive like playing a short game like tic-tac-toe, completely out of the ordinary. In the 1940s, there was maybe a handful of people on the entire planet that may have had this sort of interaction with a computer before. So Sandy decided to make this game. But, how did he actually go about doing it? Going back to these paper strips, you've probably heard of punch cards. You've probably heard of something like these. But punch cards were actually much more modern than paper tape. These paper strips actually became popular from the days of telegraphs. In the 1840s, these tapes, which included a row of sprocket holes, these small holes here, plus some number of holes to encode the data, these were first used to send telegraphs in Morse code. But eventually they wanted to encode more types of data, so they expanded from 2 holes to, say, 5-bit, 6-bit, 8-bit. Early computer makers around the time of the EDSAC had only dealt in binary, sometimes even needing to go in and manually flip switches on and off, which PS is really, really tedious. It could take up to multiple weeks to input programs that way. So instead of inputting binary, doing all of this flip switching manual setup, how about we just input actual text? Like here, we give you a list of instructions, and then you write down your program on paper using those instructions. The one for OXO looked something like this. And then once you're happy with this, then punch out your program using characters. The instructions each correspond to a pattern on your row of tape. If the first line of my program is A or X or P, then I input that code based off of this translation sheet. And then I continue through for each line of my program. The EDSAC then interpreted the input, translating it into machine ops directly using 18-bit instructions. Computers at that time were not standard. There was no standard byte. EDSAC happened to use 18 bits, but all of the early machines use different size instructions. Once that program is loaded, we can run it. It sets up the memory, which may actually be the biggest difference between how a computer fundamentally works today. Because the EDSAC had large tubes of mercury, so yes, giant containers of toxic liquid metal, where sound was played through one side and received on the other, so that the mercury temporarily holds a value of that sound as it traveled slowly through the liquid. That memory gets set up initially, writing directly to a tank, and there was at this point no concept of virtualized memory or pointers. It was just all direct memory access. So for OXO, we need to store, say, the positions in the grid. The machine halts using a waiting for input instruction. Someone inputs something via that rotary phone dial before the program then accepts that input, resumes, and then eventually you get to the end of the game after all positions have been filled and a winner is calculated. And the program ends execution. The program itself is executed in a specialized processor, and there was no concept of long-term storage. Once that machine was off, then the memory is gone. It's lost. So again, very transactional. Boot up, run some calculations, shut it down, and repeat it over and over for every program for the math department or every program that the university needed to run at the time. So it worked for that purpose. But occasionally somebody could play a quick round of tic-tac-toe with the machine, have a little fun, which is what Sandy was experimenting with. Progress in computer hardware from the late 1940s was rapid. It's not like today where phones and computers from 15 years ago don't look much different from what we have today. The EDSAC was essentially irrelevant just a few years later, and new machines emerged, faster, more programmer-friendly, with true programming languages emerging. We moved away from Mercury and onto drums and disks. Processors and switchers got much smaller very quickly. And while Sandy's game never really quite made its way to the public because the EDSAC was just for university use, there were so many more games made soon after Sandy's experiment that followed similar ideas. If you made it this far, thanks for following along with a video that is a little bit different from what I normally upload. I know it's been a long time. I took a break from YouTube. I took a break from making videos, but I wanted to try something a little bit different this year. So leave me a note. Let me know what you thought about this style of video. I'd like to hear feedback, and thanks for sticking around.